So recently, a new domain was added to the game, and with it came 2 new artifact sets. One of them was very obvious in its use. It was to support the recently released Arlecchino. The other, on the other hand, was a bit more interesting. It interacted with a mechanic that's been in the game since, well, the beginning, even if we couldn't interact with it in a meaningful way at the time. I'm of course talking about burning. And with that, let me ask you a question. Have you ever wanted to just set something on fire? In the video game, of course, not in real life. That would be a crime. Burning is a interesting mechanic. When Dendro was added to the game, it brought with it a host of new and expanded upon reactions. Burning had been in the game since 1.0, when Pyro meets Dendro. And when we finally had access to Dendro and could really interact with it ourselves, it was... It was alright. Truth be told, it was probably the worst of the Dendro reactions that we got. But on paper, it's not terrible. Apply a damage over time effect, it ticks for an amount of damage based on elemental mastery, it's a good deal. But now we have an artifact set specifically designed with burning in mind. But what does it do, exactly? Well, as long as there's burning enemies in your vicinity, the equipped character will deal up to 50% additional damage. That's a pretty good number, actually. In theory, you could put this on anyone, as long as you had the burning setup to make it work. They don't even have to be involved in the reaction, they just have to be near it. I thought I'd take it a step further. What if we could find a character and a team comp specifically with the idea of maintaining the burning reaction for as long as possible, to really hold on to that maximum damage buff? And I think I came up with something pretty good. It's actually something of a throwback, actually. Some time ago, I actually released a video all about Heizou and different teams you could do with him, and one of the ones that came up was actually the Air Fryer team, which is a pseudo-meta team, though Heizou doesn't traditionally fit into it. So here are the stars of today's show. Starting us off is going to be Nahida, whose ability lets her mark enemies, applying Dendro, and dealing a little bit of damage, based on her elemental mastery. Every enemy marked will then take subsequent damage every time they're affected by a reaction. Any reaction. This includes Swirl. Nahida will easily cover all of our Dendro needs, given that she has such a low cooldown, can apply Dendro to so many enemies so quickly, and the reapplication is stupendous. We got nothing to worry about on that front. Next up is Bennett, the premier attack buffer, a solid healer, and all-around good character. Seriously, everyone knows how broken Bennett is. Bennett's been good since his release, even if everyone didn't realize it right away. Bennett's good. Very good, in fact. And what Bennett can do for us is quite a lot. In between being able to apply a massive attack buff, as well as giving a substantial amount of healing, he's also a great source of Pyro, applying Pyro to not just your enemies, but also yourself. Now you're probably thinking, how is this helpful? Well, that's where our next player comes in, Kazuha. Kazuha, while affected by Pyro, can pretty much guarantee that his burst will always swirl Pyro, meaning we will have a constant source of Pyro application, as well as a great source of elemental mastery based damage, meaning our burning ticks are going to be really high. Well, as high as burning can go, its ceiling is not so good, but that's not the important part. All in all, these 3 make for a powerful core to any burning team. You have all-around good damage, great synergy, and easy access to the reaction. And of course, to end things off, we can't forget about the actual DPS in this team, Heizou. Heizou applies Animo at a decent rate, meaning we have easy access to swirls. He synergizes very well with swirls, given how his skill works. As a reminder, his skill deals more damage based on the number of stacks he gets, and he gets 1 stack either by charging the skill, which is very inefficient and slow, or every time a swirl happens, which is significantly better. So, simply put, you get a bunch of swirls, and you let loose a ferocious 1-punch. Man. They all come together to form what is our burning team. And Heizou will of course be holding on to the new Burning set. And 50% bonus damage to go along with that mighty one punch of Heizou's seems pretty good on paper. But let's actually see how it goes. Before we get started, let's go over the Heizou build itself, talk about the artifacts, the stats, and of course, the weapon of choice, as well as some alternatives. I spent quite a bit of time farming for this new set upon its release, and unfortunately we didn't really get anything really stand out, but I at least got something together that would give us some acceptable stats. And this is just going to be a very standard Heizou looking build, prioritizing crit rate, crit damage, and attack percent. And we're also not going to turn our noses up to Elemental Mastery, as it does give us a little bit of extra damage and swirls. For weapon, I decided to go with a Lost Prayer of the Sacred Winds, as this is my best catalyst that I currently have available to me, though there are a lot of other options that are totally acceptable. An attack percent stat stick, something like Eye of Perception, can work here, though is definitely not going to be your first pick if you have better. Or, ideally, if you're stuck in the 4-star category, something like Widsith would be absolutely perfect here. For 5 stars, well, really anything that helps your skill damage, or gives you crit rate or crit damage. I put this team through its paces, and found very quickly that single target is definitely not its strong suit, which is generally true of any burning style team. The standard air fryer team thrives in AoE, so this is no different. So, bosses, it can definitely get the job done. It's more than capable of getting a boss done, but it's not going to do it very fast. For more generic stuff like event stuff, ley lines, or domain farming, it also gets the job done. That's something that this team can absolutely thrive at, but let's be honest here, that's not what you're interested in. Pretty much any character or any team comp can in theory do those things, maybe with a few exceptions. You want to see the meat and potatoes though, right? So of course, naturally I brought it into the Abyss, and let me just preface this with, this Abyss is not kind to this style of team. In between very specific shields, a boss that has a shield combination you have to solve, as well as lots of varying sizes of waves of enemies, a lot of single target fight bosses, this wasn't great. There were some chambers that this team thrived in, most of them were pretty rough. But let's break it all down. I took this through every single floor, and getting up to 12 was certainly not a problem. 12 though? Okay, let's talk about it. So I decided to run this team on both sides, so I ran the entire Abyss twice just for this one video. And truthfully, I'm glad that I did. For Chamber 1, we were up against the Magukenki triplets, and this is where this team thrived. You had 3 medium-sized targets that were easily set on fire. And given that grouping them can be kind of awkward at times, having a constant source of ticking damage is actually noticeable here. I did a couple of attempts at it to get good times, but the grouping just never worked out in my favor. But after breaking it down and really thinking about it, this was totally 3-starable if I'd put some more time into it. Otherwise, we were stuck with a 2-star on this particular run, which ultimately is acceptable. I'm not really looking for perfect 3-star runs here. 36-starring the Abyss with this style of team in an Abyss that doesn't play nice with it wasn't the goal. The goal was to get a clear and see how the team held up. For the second half though, this team did not do as well. You'd think, given that you had multiple waves of medium-sized enemies, that this would actually have been pretty good, especially with a character like Kazuha who can group them up for you. So what happened? Well, the answer is simple. The team died. We got killed a lot. I had to play this so carefully, given the general squishiness of all members of this team. And with enemies like those new Fatui agents, I really had my work cut out for me. Overall, this was agonizingly slow and ended up being closer to a 1-star run. Clearable, absolutely. Oh, it did not feel good though. This was bad. Now, it also didn't help that there was some pyro-resistant enemies towards the middle of this floor, but that was not the problem ultimately. Chamber 2 harkened back to something I mentioned earlier. Single-target environments is not where this team shined. This was a slog to get through, even though, in theory, we had the element to get through this guy's shield. So, what was the problem? Well, the problem was that when we actually got through the shield, well, our damage windows were sort of awkward, and then we had to sort of stretch things out, and it just didn't feel good. Again, another 1-star run, but It was clearable, but man, I did not enjoy this one. Second half, on the other hand, was a fair bit better. I did ultimately only end up with a 2-star on this floor, and given that we were dealing with the Electro Shield of 2 Lectors, I'm actually surprised this went as well as it did. To be fair, Nahida was a massive boon when dealing with this, but the overall time was actually not that bad. I think with a little bit of practice and some better artifacts across the board, I actually think we could have 3-starred this. It's kind of wild to think about that on the second half, where the shields are a mess. We might have actually had a chance here. Finally, we had Chamber 3. In the first half for Chamber 3, again we find ourselves up against waves of medium-sized enemies. And again, we're advantaged here. We're against enemies that do cryo shields and things like that, so in theory, we should be absolutely set here, right? Well, not exactly. The efficiency of this team in these kind of encounters is not the best, and with enemies not lining up the way I want them to, it's absolutely devastating. I think even if I had done this perfectly, it wouldn't have been any better than a 2-star, but I don't think it would have been much better than a 2-star, but I took the 2-star in stride. It was fine. Not great, just fine. And finally, Floor 12, Chamber 3, second half. This was a nightmare. This was terrible. I hated this. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. A team that is so laser focused on a mechanic like this doesn't do well against the Baptist. Having to deal with 3 different colored shields, or else you can't even damage him, is just a nightmare. So as soon as we see that pyro shield, it's like, well, that's it. That's the run. So at best, 0 stars. Like we were lucky to clear this. It's clearable. We did it. It was possible. I was not happy about it, though. It was pretty miserable. Pretty much exactly what I expected from this chamber, but, well, what are you going to do? So that was all the runs and testing that I afforded for this team, and I actually had some fun with this. I think burning is a somewhat underrated mechanic, and it can do a lot of damage, especially when combined with this sort of air fryer setup. It's fun, does decent damage, and can handle more scenarios than you might think. Even if it's not efficient, necessarily, it can get the job done. I think once we get a character, or rather, I think if we ever get a character that has very specific mechanics that involve burning in their kit, I think this new artifact set will have a more concrete home. In the meantime, you can have some fun with it, though, just by having a Dendro and a Pyro character, and throwing it on a character that you happen to like, that you can fit into it somehow. I could see myself trying this set in a few different scenarios, and I might come back to it sometime, but I think I need to put it aside for now and work on something else. I think I've had enough of being a pyromaniac for one day, thank you. So with that, if you think I deserve it and you like what you saw, please leave a like and subscribe. It really means the world to me. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and if you've done any burning teams or have been using this artifact set, please tell me about it in the comments below. I love experimenting with new teams, so I'm always open to cool ideas. That's all from me. Cheers. Oh, also, before I wrap things up, I should remind you guys, I also stream right here on YouTube, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday to Friday. If you're interested in seeing some of these weird builds I do sometimes, stop by and check it out. Anyway, have a good one. Bye-bye.